Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the second of our 3 Neurological Framework practice sharing sessions. My name is Jenny Preston, and I'm one of the Deputy Chairs of the Scottish Government's National Advisory Committee for Neurological Conditions, and I'm delighted to be chairing this session today. But just before we start the session, may I politely request, given the number of participants this afternoon, that microphones are muted throughout the presentations, please. And could we also ask that your camera is turned on, if possible, during the facilitated breakout sessions. So today's event is about shining a spotlight on some of the work funded through Neurological Care and Support, a Framework for Action 2020 to 2025. The Neurological Framework was published in December 2019 with a vision to ensure people can access personalised care and support regardless of their condition or where in Scotland they live. Over the past 3 years, Scottish Government has, since October 2020, awarded £2.1 million to 35 projects to improve patient care and support. They've been wide-ranging in terms of delivery, geographical areas, and the conditions covered. Today's event is to raise awareness of approaches taken to improve care for people with neurological conditions in Scotland and to get others thinking about how they could link to these projects and enhance service delivery. We want to look at ways to continue the conversation beyond these sessions, and we hope to provide opportunities to explore some of the work in more detail through appropriate networks. Today's session will focus on digital solutions to health and care in neurology. Commitment 8 from the framework aims to improve the use of digital technology to ensure that integrated services seamlessly meet the needs of people with neurological conditions and those who provide care and support to them. Scottish Government colleagues will give a strategic overview of where we are, and we will hear briefly from 5 projects, including a range of statutory and third sector partners. Each project has a limit of only 5 minutes to present their work to you, which we know is extremely challenging. We will hear from the projects in 2 groups, and there will be an opportunity for your questions after each group. Once we've had both groups and both question and answer sessions, you will be transported into breakout rooms by the wonders of MS Teams and technology, where there will be an opportunity for further discussion. We'll then come together for a final summing up session before closing at 1:30, just in time for some lunch. But before that, I would like to hand over to Francis Santos and Mark Simpson from the Scottish Government Strategy and Policy Unit, who will present on the digital health and care strategy and provide some context for today's session, particularly in relation to facilitating scale and innovation of some of the digital approaches we have funded. Over to you, Francis and Mark.
Morning, well, afternoon indeed. That's a good start. Thanks very much for offering us a slot to speak to the group. Francis and I will do a bit of a double-hander. I'll give a general overview of the digital health and care strategy, and then Francis will speak in a bit more detail on one of the key work streams therein, which is the digital front door. So go to the first slide, please. You may be aware that the digital health and care strategy was first produced in April 2018. In the wake of the pandemic, that was refreshed in October of last year to reassess our priorities and move towards a position where we develop an implementation. I won't go through the slide in detail, but just really to highlight in the vision there that when we underline the design and delivery of services, we do have a very strong commitment to a human rights-based approach. And as part of that, we're committed to making sure that people that are involved in the services being developed are also involved in the design, so we have a co-design approach. We have 3 aims in the strategy. Those really group our stakeholders into 3 distinct groups: the citizens who want to have greater access to data and digital services and more say in how that information is used and shared. We've got those working in health and care, the health and care sector, who want digital to support them in the job that they do and ultimately to provide better outcomes for those they support. And we also recognise the importance of innovators, industry and researchers and how we can help to facilitate the better use and sharing of data to provide insight and ultimately better services and treatments for people in Scotland. So for the next slide, please. I've mentioned that this was more recently coalesced into a delivery plan. This was published about 4 weeks ago. I can recommend it as a reference. It's on our website, digihealthcare.scot. But essentially what this does, as you might expect, is it sets out the key priorities and milestones, and it focuses initially, or it's aimed initially at those working in the sector so that they can get a clear line of sight about their organisation, where it sits against those intended outputs. And the aim is that moving into the next iteration, we will be linking the delivery plan to partner organisations' own annual delivery plans so that we all have that clear line of sight between our work and the intended objectives. The next iteration of the plan will also be more public facing, and our aim for that is publication in April next year to cover the period 23-24. Next slide, please. I wouldn't worry too much about this. It's just really to say this is getting published on our website quite shortly. We've also mapped the delivery plan against a 3 horizons model. So this just really gives a ready reference on the groups of outputs and where they sit in a short, medium and longer term timeframe. So just really to highlight that, and that'll be on our website very shortly. Next slide, please. So just my final slide here is to give a flavour of some of the work streams that we have in play at the moment. So we've got Scotland's first dedicated health and care data strategy. This is the result of extensive stakeholder engagement and public consultation, and that's currently going through a governance process for sign-off, and we're aiming for that to be published early in 2023. That's accompanied by work we've just recently begun on National Information Governance Programme. So this, as the name suggests, aims to achieve consistent standards across Scotland and a shared understanding about the framework that we aim to develop. I would just simply say that in terms of a cultural dimension, we're really keen as part of that programme to convey the message to people that information governance, far from being a barrier, is actually an enabler, so that supports us to develop and deliver these services and work within a consistent framework. As I mentioned, we're committed to inclusion. We've got a dedicated work stream on Digital Citizen, and as part of that, we've embarked on a £2 million programme of understanding digital inclusion in the context of mental health and housing. And then finally, we've got Digital Front Door, at which point I'll hand over to Francis. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Hopefully you can hear me okay, folks. So just building on Mark was talking about, one of the kind of key streams that we have is the Digital Front Door programme, which was, well, as a Scottish Government commitment in terms of digital health and care strategy, but also the programme for government as well. And it started off as a commitment around a My NHS app, which has been, the language has been tweaked because we did see it more than NHS. It was very much health and care, so we wanted to go beyond that kind of original idea of an NHS app, which people will probably be familiar with that they have in England, the NHS app in England. So this is very much looking at our response to delivering that for the people in Scotland. Next slide, please. So in terms of the Digital Front Door, the main benefits we see about it, and it's very much as it was kind of introduced before Mark spoke about the looking at innovation and integrating different things into that kind of that bigger piece for both citizens and services themselves. So very much a consistent and national approach for the people of Scotland and its staff ultimately as well. And that kind of greater personalisation, basically. And along not just having a digital solution, but also making sure that we're not going down that digital route of having just digital and it's digital only. It's very much, hopefully, the approach we will take is that there will be a digital offering, but also there will be that non-digital route as well. Again, focusing on that inclusion aspect, which Mark touched on earlier. So we see this very much as an enabler for local service transformation, again, linked to the projects you guys are involved in. And hopefully we'll have that pipeline of work that will be able to feed this in the future. And at the moment, we're at the stage where we have got a commitment to do something within this Parliament period, where we hope to get a kind of initial release version of the application itself out by winter next year. but it will be very much an iterative process. So as I said, it will be a kind of essentially provide a framework and kind of tool set to accelerate digital enabled service provision. It will include things potentially like chatting up, the online chat, and being able to put different things in the next slide. I'll kind of touch on that a bit more. But we'll also have, although there'll be benefits for the users themselves, again, it will hopefully help reduce the impact on services and will hopefully make our system a bit more efficient. Well, obviously, those benefits of that user experience hopefully will be enhanced from a digital perspective. Again, potentially reducing workload on staff as well. We see that as a key benefit within this work. Next slide, please. So what could it potentially do? We don't have anything yet. As I said, the first release will be out next year, hopefully by winter time. But potentially it could do different stuff. But we see it as the main route, and for people to link in with their information, be able to interact with services, make their transactional decisions, whether that's making an appointment, potentially declining an appointment, kind of rearranging an appointment, all that kind of thing. Whether they can see some of their own personal information, be able to update their own information, potentially look at their own records, whether it's obviously we've got the vaccination certification just now, potentially that kind of thing as well. So really just having that ultimately that overall view for the user, to be able to see their full picture from that certainly health and care perspective. But then I would allow the staff that route, that standardised route of being able to interact with that individual as well. So I'm just checking the time, how long I've got left. Next slide, please. So one of the digital front door essentially is a programme just now. We don't have anything, but you'll maybe be aware that NHS 24 launched an app this week, which is NHS 24 Online. We've provided the access, the links to the app stores down at the bottom there. That will be, while that's an NHS 24 app, it's not necessarily the digital front door programme specifically. That will test out some of the things that we are interested in terms of the different pieces of work we have, such as the Scottish Service Directory on NHS Inform. NHS Inform generally in terms of that digital content that's available, being able to utilise all those kind of Lego pieces to build that kind of better experience for the user, to improve their experience and have that kind of greater control of what they're doing. One acknowledgements just now that NHS Inform potentially hard to find things at times, because ultimately it's a 6-year-old website, so which has just been continually built on rather than actually necessarily improved. So that's one of the kind of key ambitions we have got going forward. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, next slide. But ultimately, it will provide that learning for the digital front door programme. So some of the questions we have is we've kind of laid out here. I know one of the ones you're particularly interested in is around the innovation side and how do we adopt. So hopefully I've answered that a little in terms of what I've said. We see the digital front door programme as being that way of people potentially being able to hook in and basically push their programmes. But again, there will be that kind of validation process we'll have to establish in terms of what gets included in digital front door and what doesn't, what is the criteria, that thing. Again, all that kind of thing will have to be ironed out, but it is very much looking at again trying to improve the experience of users, but also trying to support the system as well. And just finally on the last slide, please. And this is our contact information. So this is obviously a really quick presentation, but we'd be happy to engage with you further if you wish. We will also stay around to continue for the session as well. So hopefully that was helpful. Thank you.
Thank you both very much, and perfectly on time. So we've got off to a great start. Thank you both so much. I'd now like to hand you over to Dr. Craig Heath, Consultant Neurologist in NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde. Thank you, Craig.
Hello, afternoon, everyone. Now, did I share my slides, or can you all see them?
We can see we can see them,
right?
Craig.
So
Yes, we can see
did I
them.
just
Thank you.
report? Did I just ask them to move on? Right. Okay.
You do.
So my name's Craig Keith. I'm a neurologist in Glasgow. And I think my biggest challenge of the week is how I deliver this talk in 5 minutes, to be honest. But it's an update on what's been termed the Scottish Epilepsy Register, which is essentially what we've done is we have built a infrastructure that alerts clinicians when an adverse event occurs in anyone with epilepsy. And it's done via this MicroStrategies dashboard. Next slide, please. And this is a graphical representation of what we've actually done. So we have a cohort of people with epilepsy, and we are keen to know when something bad happens so that we can support them in a timely manner. So we do that by accessing routinely collected health data, and the data that we've started using as a starting point is dispensing data. So we access the PIS feed, which is the pharmacy data, to allow us to identify, to assess adherence in people with epilepsy. We access the pregnancy data so that we can be made aware when a woman with epilepsy books during pregnancy. We're interested in the A&E data and admissions data so we can support people with epilepsy following a crisis, for example, in attendance at A&E, and also death, so that when one of the cohort die of an epilepsy-related death, we can support the family in a timely manner. As I mentioned from the previous slide, the alert comes up on a MicroStrategies dashboard. Next slide, please. In terms of measures of success to date, so our early aim was to try and improve pregnancy services in women with epilepsy. And the rationale for this is that mortality rates are much higher in women with epilepsy than those without. And the suggestion is that at least part of that is due to accessing services and part of it's due to poor medication adherence. So what we've done, we've accessed the BadgerNet data, which is a data set that's used in pregnancy. And when women book, their details are put onto BadgerNet, and we access BadgerNet. So when they book, an alert appears on our MicroStrategies dashboard. And the kind of data we get is the CAIs, estimated date of delivery, date of last seizure, etc. And that allows the epilepsy specialist nurses to then review the electronic patient records and ensure that women do have active epilepsy. And if they do, it then allows a telephone consultation to be generated within a number of weeks. So it means that women are being seen very quickly after booking. At the point of the consultation, we also access the dispensing data, and that's displayed in an app we've developed called Mavis. And what that is an adherence app. So it allows us to measure adherence in women with epilepsy during pregnancy. So the consultation takes place, women don't not only have access to the epilepsy team very early, but it allows us to have an open conversation with them regarding the importance of medication adherence during pregnancy. In terms of follow-up, if they're well, they can have patient-initiated review, but if there's active ongoing issues, we'll see them regularly throughout the pregnancy. Next slide, please. In terms of challenges, I will put aside the challenges of working with a very supportive IT department during a pandemic, because it was virtually impossible. But despite that, I think we have made reasonable progress. The next challenges for us is this infrastructure generates a huge amount of data. If you think of all the data we're pulling in, dispensing, attendance, death, pregnancy, looking at sodium valproate. So I think we need to give a wee bit of thought to how best we use this data to improve services. I think we're giving some thought and have given some thought on key priorities. And initially we started with women with epilepsy during pregnancy, moving on to regular attendance at A&E, with some recent data suggesting that one of the biggest predictors of death is a regular attendance at A&E. So how best we address that to see people quickly, and also moving on to adherence. So we know from previous studies that if your medication adherence is poor, your risk of death is 3 times higher. So how we actually address that issue, given the fact about 20% of people with epilepsy have evidence of poor adherence. Next slide. In terms of what next, we have more or less completed this in GGC. The aim is now to roll out to the adjacent health boards, so those that were responsible in the West Coast, so Ayrshire and Arran and Lanarkshire, where I do my district general, and also Tayside, who've been involved in this project from the start. Next slide, please. And finally, where can we find out more? At the moment, there's nowhere to find out more, but the aim is to, once this is up and live and running perfectly well, then the aim is to have a meeting with all stakeholders from health boards throughout the country to discuss how best we can roll this out to essentially all of the health boards in Scotland, and how we best make use of the data that it generates. I think that's me. Thank you.
Oh, congratulations, Craig. Just a couple of seconds over. Well done. Thank you so much. What a lot of information to get in 5 minutes. I'd now like to hand over to Norma Crawford, please. Norma is Project Manager at Quarriers.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for inviting me today to discuss what I feel is a really important piece of work that we do here. I've supported this project for almost 5 years, and currently we support people living with epilepsy in Moray, Aberdeenshire, Aberdeen City and Fife. Slide 2, please. Got to work very quickly at the beginning of the pandemic, distributing kit to people with epilepsy, and initially focused on people who lived remotely or on their own, but not exclusively. Training people to operate equipment was at times a challenge, and workers have sat in people's gardens and under umbrellas to ensure people with epilepsy were confident in what they were doing and could get online. It became apparent that people were forgetting passwords and how to access certain information and how to do things online. So we developed an iPad guide that had a folded in cover that people could store personal information. We set up online support groups, and one continues to this day to be facilitated weekly. And we spoke to our links within GP practices about changing annual epilepsy reviews to online so that these things were not missed. And again, this continues to be an ongoing piece of work. Next slide, please. In 2019, we decided it would be a good idea to keep some anonymous data from delivering annual epilepsy reviews for 2 GP surgeries that we support. It really surprised us to see that over the course of the last 3 years, things have changed very dramatically. So 2019, we did clinics in person, and thereafter have all been virtually. As you can see from the chart, the people who have been unable to attend or who have not attended their annual epilepsy review has reduced quite a bit in the blue markers, but the number of people needing further support after attending their annual epilepsy reviews has increased quite dramatically. Feedback from people with epilepsy has on the whole been very positive in terms of these clinics changing to being virtual from being in person previously, and with most people preferring to have their annual epilepsy review this way. However, there are still people who do prefer to be seen in person. Slide 4, please. Due to what we see as a successful piece of work, this is something that we see value in continuing with. It's difficult to get the attention of new GP practices in order to offer support with this piece of work, as they are so incredibly busy. However, we are in the process of setting up a new online annual epilepsy review clinic with a GP practice in the Fife area, and hope to have this up and running by January. Funding for our service is difficult. However, those who do financially support the service do see the value in it, as well as the benefits to people living with epilepsy. So we will continue our funding mission. Next slide, please. Oh no, I'm almost finished, sorry. I'm on a different piece of paper. It's okay. The online support group has been developed in such a way that initially it was only for one area. It's now opened up to other areas where the service supports people living with epilepsy, and it is well attended. We're currently evolving this so that people with epilepsy can begin to facilitate these sessions as well. And we are currently organising our Christmas online party on the 19th of September at 7 PM, and everybody's invited. As you can see, my contact details are on there. I've put the contact details of the 2 GP practices that we support with the annual epilepsy reviews, in case that's of interest to anyone. Feel free to get in touch if you need or want to.
Thank you. Excellent. Wow, I'm so impressed. Everybody is absolutely sticking to time, which is incredibly helpful. Thank you so much, Norma. And now Tracy. Tracy Harrison is the Local Networks Officer for MS Society Scotland. Thank you, Tracy.
Thanks, Jenny. No pressure to keep that 5 minutes. So thank you for the opportunity to speak about the MS Wellbeing Hub, which is providing support across Scotland to the MS community. Next slide, please. Thank you. Nearly 16,000 people in Scotland have MS, and a large portion of them, as with many people living with neurological conditions, were asked to be stringent in socially isolating themselves during the height of the pandemic. This exacerbated pre-existing challenges of anxiety, stress and depression, combined with postponed or cancelled healthcare appointments and a changing landscape for accessing reliable information. To address this significant service and support gaps, we very quickly co-designed and put into place a variety of virtual support services, which we've now termed under the heading MS Wellbeing Hub. Its aim was to address our community's needs during the crisis, but what we have definitely substantiated is that the virtual model is not just for COVID. The Hub's core design is person-centred, and its online delivery enables us to engage a wider audience, including those with poor mobility, family and work commitments, and lots of other pre-existing health conditions. We currently have a project coordinator, which is myself, an assistant, and then we contract out to a variety of delivery partners, which are a mix of self-employed small businesses through to academics and a variety of others. Online group sessions and activities are booked via Eventbrite via a self-service booking, and these are designed to help with physical well-being, and these have included physio, balance and strength, tai chi, yoga, and then we have emotional well-being, which have included one-to-one counselling, meditation, mindfulness, and we've also developed a number of peer groups. For a number of people, the initial engagement with the Hub comes via them sending us an email or a telephone call. They're initially triaged, and then one of the team arranged to speak with the person to get to find out a bit more about their circumstances and what's going on. We then look to tailor the support that we can offer them, whether it be through the Hub, via our UK services, or indeed by local services. Next slide, please. Our Hub builds on incremental innovation, it adapts, and it's quickly been changing through this time since May 2020. We gather a lot of feedback via participant surveys, we have regular focus groups, and we also have an insight volunteer advisory group. As I've mentioned, that this model was co-designed, but it's important to note that through the last 2 years, we've engaged with a group of volunteers who have changed through the time to actually ensure that what we're doing in the Hub is very relevant to the MS community. Our initial aim was to deliver a suite of 1,129 live stream sessions, which would benefit around 780 unique individuals. These figures show that we have smashed that and we're well on the way to delivering further. What's been quite fundamental is we've actually engaged with a new audience, with around 70% of the Hub's participants actually being new to accessing MS support services out with that of the NHS. In evaluating the impact that it's made, we have done some pre and post surveys using software Alchemar. Some of the findings are here, but one of the biggest findings is with relation to our counselling service. With that, we've used the Core 10 scoring, and that has demonstrated that we have an impact on about 73% of the people accessing the counselling show a significant clinical improvement. What hasn't been so easy, and we're trying to refine that, is actually doing that, what benefits people are making with their physical activity or their mobility, because they come in for different reasons. We initially tried using the OXPAC scoring. That proved not to be given us the data we needed. We've now moved to more of a cover of quality of life using the Office of National Statistics questions. Next slide, please. We have been successful during this time also to get other trust and donation money, so we've bolted on different services from the insights that we gather ongoing. Some of this is around our peer support model. We're currently reviewing how we can incorporate our learnings across the organisation as a whole, and actually hoping that we can develop some of these services UK-wide and embed that into the support that we can provide across the country. Some of the other key activities that we hope to aim to do is further development and expansion of our peer support programme, review and evaluation of our recently launched resilience course and possibly other courses which will be tailored around mental health, looking to work with partners from the third sector, to possibly the NHS, MS Revive, oxygen therapy centres, to look at that hybrid activities, because we realise that, and from our feedback, a lot of people want that face-to-face. If we're delivering the information online, why can we not zoom that into somewhere that people are meeting face-to-face? And hopefully, as little as secure funding to enable us to really embed the model and to actually explore some other things. Last slide, please. And to find out some more, we have a web page, we've got our email address, and I've just noted down some press releases and blogs that we've had as part of the service. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tracy. Oh, wow, you are all making this so easy for me today. Thank you so much, everybody. Okay, it now gives me great pleasure to open up the discussion and the conversation. If people have got questions, please either pop them in the chat, or if you want to just raise your hand, and we'll invite those questions. Any questions for anybody? You've all gone quiet on me. Ah, there we go. Richard, would you like to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Jenny. It's a question for Mark and Francis. So you mentioned in the presentation the National Information Governance Programme, and how that's going to be an enabler rather than a barrier. And a lot of the projects that we've provided funding to have set up data sharing agreements with NHS boards so that the referrals can come direct from the NHS boards to the third sector organisations that are delivering services similar to what Tracy and Norma both described. But that has been, I think we found that's been quite challenging in some of the boards, less so in others. So does that imply that from that information governance strategy, you're working towards a sort of nationally consistent approach that that boards can adopt? Thanks.
Yeah, I'll maybe invite Francis to speak as well. But my understanding is that yes, that is the case. The aim of the programme is to achieve a consistent national framework across Scotland, to try and enable the more effective sharing of information. Notwithstanding, obviously, we do have regulatory requirements in place. But as part of the discussion, my colleagues are taking it forward on the basis of engagement. So along with the CSIROs, they're also embarking upon a programme of public engagement so that people generally are aware of the safeguards that are in place. And as part of our data strategy, we also recognise the need for wider understanding of safeguards and how those can provide reassurance. What I can do is maybe pop in the chat the email address of my colleague David Webster, who's handling the engagement process, and I'm sure he'd be very happy to take any questions or to be approached by any colleagues in that discussion. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add, Francis.
Just a couple of simple points is ultimately, I think over the last couple of years, we've probably moved away from IG being as big a barrier as it was, because we've managed to kind of jump a few across some of the kind of hurdles a bit quicker than we did before. Ultimately, and traditionally it's been seen as a bit of a barrier, but ultimately that, as Mark said, there's safeguards we have to kind of meet. But ultimately, we want to make things easier to do things, and ultimately, you don't want to be repeating the same task multiple times in different areas if we don't have to. So if we try and make the whole process a bit simpler, and if we can have that national consistency, that's ultimately one of the key aims. So hopefully, one of the big outputs will be that we actually simplify it and make it easier for people to actually progress work that they want to take forward.
Thank you both very much. Tanith, do you have a question for us?
I do. It's a question for Tracy, actually. I'm really interested in the number of people that you reached through the MS Hub and the fact that 70% of those people were new to out with NHS support services. How did you reach those people so that they knew about the Hub?
with great determination and much labouring, to be honest with you, Tanith. It's not been an easy task, and it's spent a lot of time of trying to do social media posts. Social media has been really, to be honest with you, a big driver. So we've done a lot of learning around what people engage with. So we've had a lot of case studies, we've done a lot of blogs, we've done some press. We've had some direct referrals from some of the MS teams across the country, but to be honest with you, it's been mostly getting the word out around social media.
Excellent, thank you. My question as well, Tanith, so thank you for asking it. Okay, any other questions from anybody? I'm just trying to keep an eye on the chat here as well. Any other questions? Oh, and we have indeed. We have a hand up. Let me just see who it is. Maggie.
Hi, thanks, Jenny. It was just a quick question for Craig. I mean, that just seems like a really sensible, really slick kind of way of identifying your patients who need a bit of more support or need to be, you know, identified in terms of having epilepsy and the risks there. Do you have any initial data on the initial impact of using the app, like either mortality or maybe lack of medical complications or anything around that?
Thanks, Maggie. At the moment, we don't. The only information we have so far, most of the time, has been taken up actually building it. So it's only been used in the sort of clinical domain in the last 6 months, and we've concentrated mainly on women with epilepsy during pregnancy. So what we know now, looking at some of the provisional data, is we done a study before we had the dashboard available, and we were aware that we missed about 30% of women during pregnancy, so they were never seen within epilepsy services. So by using the BadgerNet data, we now realise we can access all women shortly after booking. Another thing that we've looked at is adherence. So we measured adherence for a calendar year in all women with epilepsy during pregnancy, and we found that 50% had poor adherence, of which 50% had a seizure. So again, with that in mind, in the last 6 months, when the nurses have been meeting with the women, they've been highlighting the importance of adherence, and we've got some provisional data coming through looking as if adherence has improved as well. So not only are we capturing all women at the point of booking, but we're actually improving adherence. But we have got a piece of work pending, so we've got, at the end of the calendar year, we're going to repeat the study again, and that'll give us some evidence to suggest, or hopefully suggest, that the dashboard itself does improve care, but it does take a wee bit of time to get to gather that evidence.
Thanks. Yeah, sounds excellent.
It does, doesn't it? And sure, it just illustrates the potential for a whole host of other conditions as well. I'm sure there's lots of other groups, disease-specific groups, patiently watching as this work progresses, because it definitely illustrates the tremendous potential. Okay, by my reckoning, we have a couple of minutes before we go into the next session. Are there any more questions? No? No? Okay. Well, if there are no questions, we will move into the next session. So could I invite Iona Campbell, Project Manager from Spina Bifida, Hydrocephalus, Scotland, please.
Hi everybody, it's nice to see you all today. I hope you can hear me all right. So our project is called the Healthy Aging Hub and Wellbeing Matrix, and it is a large project that we've been working on for kind of over the past couple of years to really bring our services together and provide people with a web of sort of services similar to some of the other work that some of the other charities have been doing, and thinking about kind of how do we link these services in with each other. So I'll provide a little bit of background if we go to the next slide. So back in 2014, there was a bit of research done by Andy, who's here today as well, and Sharon, looking along with Robert Karahi, looking at transition into adult services and how we can improve this process for young people. And it was kind of decided that a teleclinic might be quite a good idea. It meant that young people didn't have to travel, they could have more independence, and they were able to kind of attend clinics clinics with lovely Caroline that's in the middle there, from online. And that was kind of the beginning of this kind of idea of the virtual journey around health and e-health. And this was obviously well before the pandemic. And it was an amazing resource during the pandemic. And Caroline focuses, well, her domain is kind of incontinence, bowels and bladder. So that's kind of her focus, but she does focus on a wide variety of health and well-being issues as well. So that's a little bit of background to kind of what we were doing before this project. If we go to the next slide. And then in the clinic in the centre, we used this wellness wall to understand how people were feeling, and they would score kind of on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being not so great, 10 being on top of the world. And then asking them to kind of attach feelings to those, to that kind of that level of well-being. So you can kind of see there different words, happy, sad, and all that sort of stuff, but then more kind of specific words. We decided that to kind of take our online kind of digital health journey a little bit further, we'd like to develop an app. And as you can see in the photos here, we've basically kind of moved this wellness wall online to an app that is kind of can be accessed on iOS and Android devices. And we expanded it further to look at other areas of well-being. So, I mean, obviously we've got the mood there, feeling dreadful to great, and all the in-between. We've also got the pain assessment. And you can see on the side there that it tracks over time. And this is great for kind of looking at dips in health, but also when is someone feeling good and how do we kind of maintain them feeling at kind of a good level. So throughout this project, we achieved creating kind of this app for people with neurological health conditions, focusing on people with Spina Bifida, obviously, because that's our charity. And we found it's a great way for people to take control of their own health and add their own perception of health into their record. It's a good way to kind of record information over time, like you can see with the tracking there. And it means that people, there's a lot of other cards that are included in the app as well, including an emergency summary, an about me section. People can add videos and photos onto the app as well. We've also got bits where you can track sleep, exercise, calories, even things like your blood pressure and things like that as well. So it's kind of a well integrated app, and we're constantly working on it as well to kind of improve these things. So this will kind of act as the central point for this wellbeing matrix or wellbeing web that I was talking about, and kind of bring all these services together. It also offers an internal messaging for staff and staff with service users so that they can kind of discuss anything that's recorded on the app. And it's a great way for staff to kind of, if they see a dip with the service users' well-being, they can kind of reach out to them and either offer one-to-one group sessions, maybe a clinic appointment, or with our counselling service, or we can signpost them to well-being resources that we've been creating as well. So next slide. So kind of achievements and benefits of the app. It's a way for service users to take control of their own health and improve health literacy and understanding of well-being. So if you're constantly kind of tracking your moods and naming those feelings, I suppose that's a great starting point. Understanding, okay, why am I not feeling so great today? What else can we look at? Is it pain? Is it sleep? Are they all each other? And we're trying to improve this sense of understanding of well-being as a holistic idea linked to all these factors, and trying to make it about the whole person, not just their condition. And also on top of that, the perception of this is really important. One person's pain levels is going to be different from somebody else's, so that individual tracking is really, really important. We're also able to kind of track individual trends, but also global trends. So if we're looking at across the board, all of our service users, they're all kind of tracking these things. Can we look at certain areas that there's constant dips in this well-being, and how can we kind of work on improving these? So it's a great thing for looking at well-being for our service users, but it's also a great way of evaluating our services too, to see if specific interventions are working well across the board. Like I said, kind of an enhanced understanding of well-being amongst service users, and such as personal mental health check-ins. And if someone is seeing our counsellor, then they can also kind of use this information in their sessions. It also is great because we work with people with hydrocephalus who often experience memory issues. So it's a great place for people to store information that they can take along to appointments with them, that they don't need to remember on the spot, which is something that our service users often say is a challenge for them. So we think that this is a great solution for this. And again, it's just another tool that staff and service users can use for self-management, adding that into an overall plan. It's not the only resource, but it's part of this kind of web of resources. If you go on to the next slide. So this is kind of looking at the trends, and this is kind of like a proof of concept of how this would work. You can see on the right hand side, we could be looking at different areas of the country with people with spina bifida or other neurological health conditions, and seeing if there's any particular areas where there are dips in well-being. And again, that's the same kind of for the individual on the left there, looking at their trends over time. How does it interact with each other? How do their pain and sleep levels interact? How does their BMI interact with other areas of their mental health? And we can look at that over time and look for solutions and interventions for this, along with the service user themselves. Next slide, please.
Iona, sorry, could I just ask you to summarise quickly, please?
Oh yes, no worries, no worries.
Time. Thank you.
Yes, so I mean, this is the last slide anyway. So next steps is kind of just to share this practice and to share with other kind of health boards and other charities. And we hope to we're rolling out currently at the moment, and we're recruiting a young person's transition worker where we hope to embed this with young people and young adults as well. And encourage collaboration with health boards and other charities. So yeah, that's that's me. Thank you, everyone.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you. And last but by no means least, can I introduce Dr. Jane Moyer, clinical psychologist in NHS Lanarkshire. Thank you.
Hi there, everyone. It's great to be invited along today. I'm actually putting on a stopwatch now to keep myself on time. Could I get the next slide up, please? So our project looked at developing a patient-held record for individuals that had sustained a brain injury. So just for a bit of kind of context and background to the project, what we found was patients, when they have had a brain injury, they're in hospital acutely, they can often experience confusion, they can struggle to hold their attention on things, to take in information, to remember that after a delay. And when they're in hospital, that's when they're getting quite a lot of that really important information from consultants about what injury they sustained, what treatments they've had, what follow-up they might get, but they're maybe struggling to kind of take in that information and struggle to remember that after they've been discharged. And what kind of came to the fore, particularly over COVID, when family members were not able to get into hospital to see people, and they maybe weren't getting that information from consultants, from medical staff, so they weren't able to support the person afterwards, and that we were seeing people being discharged who really weren't able to give any kind of account of what their injury was and how that might impact them. And after they're getting discharged, they're then being needing to interact with lots of different services. So they might be having to contact DVLA to give information about what their injury was, or apply for benefits, where again they're being asked for things like dates of injury and what their injury was. And people were really struggling in those situations. So it highlighted for us that need for people to have access to some written information that was kind of easily understood about their injury, to help them kind of to feel a bit empowered in these situations and less anxious about going into them. Next slide, please. So we developed a patient-held record for patients with brain injury. So we were really keen to kind of consult patients and family members and carers and get their views on what information they felt they needed and kind of what format that would have, what were the really key things for them. So we had lots of people that were willing to help us with that. So we consulted those to find out what the important bits were. And we did a bit of a literature review to look at other patient-held records. We weren't able to find another one that was kind of specifically for brain injury, but we did find some for other neurological conditions like stroke that helped us with kind of design of our document. So in terms of the different sections for that, so our document has a kind of an about me section that has the demographic information and then some important information on the front. So say somebody has a communication difficulty, it might say things like, I need a bit more time, so give me additional time to respond. Then we had information about their injury, so dates for hospital admission and discharges, any treatments they had, consultant name, and a bit of clear information about what their injury was, and also a bit of a record of the rehab they'd had with our team. So what professionals they were involved with, what their rehabilitation goals were, where they got to with their rehab, and any kind of strategies that really helped them while they were engaging with us that they might want to continue to use in the long term. And we got a bit of feedback on that and kind of formatted it, and we're able to create our document. So next slide, please. So, you know, we found that patients, you know, the feedback they gave us was that, you know, it was really useful for them to have that information. It helped them to feel a little bit more confident when they were going into appointments with other health professionals or kind of social care, third sector organisations. Some of the kind of qualitative feedback they gave us was, you know, it's great to have my information in black and white, and they felt it's positive to be able to see where you've come to. So having that kind of record of what they'd achieved in rehabilitation was important to them. And also you might forget what's helped, so it's good to have that. So people kind of appreciated having that summary of strategies that they had found helpful during rehab. Next slide. So moving forward, we would hope that all kind of clients of our service will have a patient held record completed with them, and they would have that then post-discharge to help them in appointments. And we're going to continue to gather a bit of feedback on it. So a lot of the time was kind of in the development of the document. So we're continuing to gather feedback on how people have found it to make sure it's providing the right information and it's as user-friendly as possible. And we're going to be reviewing it at regular intervals because it does have some signposts to import, you know, resources that people might find helpful, so to make sure to keep those up to date. And we're keen to kind of consider ways that we can share. I think it is something that could be shared quite easily across health boards and with maybe other neurological conditions as well. So any suggestions for that, welcomed. And next slide. And that's just information on how to get in touch if anybody wants a bit of further information. And hopefully we should be able to get that report up on the NHS Lanarkshire very shortly. NHS Lanarkshire site. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Clearly our stopwatches are in total synchronicity. Excellent. Thank you very much, both Iona and Jane, for continuing to keep us on track for this afternoon. So another opportunity to ask some questions. I see the chat is quite busy, which is exciting. And some of you are already asking questions and also receiving some answers within the chat, which is absolutely fabulous. Are there any questions that people would like to ask within the group at this stage? Yes, we have a hand up, and it is from Leslie. Leslie, would you like to come in, please?
Thanks, Jenny. Question for Jane. Great development of the handheld record. I applaud you. Is it for acquired brain injury, traumatic brain injury, or is it just any brain injury?
Yeah, so within our team, it's, you know, acquired brain injury. So yeah, it can be all different types: traumatic injuries, hypoxic injuries, infections. So lots of different types of injury. I suppose the beauty of it is that the information that we're giving people is tailored to their injury. So, you know, we're saying this is what happened to you, you know, and a bit of information about that. And what we did alongside the record was kind of develop just small paragraphs of information about lots of common conditions that we see to make it easy for staff to kind of have a simplified written summary of different types of injury that could be easily kind of brought into the document.
That's great, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Maggie?
Thanks, like two really good presentations on great sort of patient-centred developments, and I think it's just so important that we have to focus on the right information to our patients and accessibility. Practical question for Jane. Again, that just, you know, it sounds great that people had that information, and it is so important, particularly in brain injury, and I work with people with brain injury where you know, it's easily forgotten information, and if they've got it there as a record and their families have, then it's really important for that to be accessible. So my question is, where does that sit? So how do they access it? Was it a, you know, was it a document? Was it something, you know, an ongoing, and could it be added to by other professionals and staff and updated? How did that work?
Yeah, so it was a paper document that we developed, Maggie. So there, you know, it people could add a bit to it. So there's some space for kind of notes at the end where they can add in kind of additional things. But we have kind of done that for people, typed it up and left them a little bit of space to add their own important things to it. So we give them a few copies, but I suppose they can come back to us if they lose it, which I'm sure will happen, to get a further one. But I think it would be great as well to have some kind of digital way of sharing that people could keep up to date. So that would be something that would be really interesting for future. So I was watching there earlier on when they were talking about My NHS app and things. So that felt like maybe a little bit ambitious for our team to tackle, but certainly something that we'd be interested in if things like that are being developed, to be able to kind of have that information online would be great.
I think that would be a really interesting conversation to continue, because I think that's quite, hopefully the sort of information that would be really useful for patients to have access to on an app like My NHS, if that's how it's going to develop.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? Everybody's gone quiet today. Okay, and in that case, Jane, can I ask, we'll ask both of them, Jane and Iona, that obviously the work that you've both been doing is very specific to individual conditions. What are your thoughts in terms of sort of scalability and moving across to other conditions? What are your initial thoughts on that, please?
I'm happy to go first. Well, we had kind of developed the app in a way that it could be generalised, and it's because it's the way that we've created it and making it person-centred. All of the tiles that are on the app, it's called, I don't think I mentioned it, it's called My CarePod. The tiles that are on the app can be removed and added to make it more person-centred. This is also quite important for our service users with hydrocephalus. We want to kind of build up that use of the app rather than just exposing to like the whole thing. It can be a wee bit overwhelming. So that's the kind of the way that we would go about if it was rolled out to other conditions. Those different things could be added in. Also, if other organisations were wanting to develop their own kind of tiles to add in, that would be possible as well. Yeah, so that's kind of our plan for that. Yeah, that's how we would kind of scale that out.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, when the document isn't populated with information for each individual patient, it is quite generic. It could work really well for different neurological conditions. There's space for kind of information about the condition, about the management of it, about the strategies that person has found helpful. So that could work across a lot of different neurological conditions, I think. It's just kind of how to get it out there and how to share it, I suppose, across different places. So today is a helpful way to do that. But yeah, so we have links with certain teams, but in terms of how to kind of make people aware that that they could look at that and alter it and use it for their own services, that's where we're needing a bit of help, I think.
Okay, that's perfect, because in a sense that takes us nicely to the discussion session, and sustainability and scalability are key factors that we are very mindful of in relation to the next steps in relation to the framework. So can I pass you over to my technology gurus who will make some magic happen and take us to the breakout room. And thank you to everybody for staying with us and having, I'm sure, interesting conversations. Certainly the group that I was part of, we did. So can I now hand over to the facilitators to share some feedback from their groups, please. Maggie, would you be happy to start with that, please?
I'm happy to go first. Not sure if I'll be completely organised around this, but lots of very positive discussion, really starting with the patient at the centre there and saying how important patient-centred and patient-held data and access to that for patients and usefulness for that for patients. So, lots of positivity across all the projects. We discussed there. A couple of things which I think are important, where we were thinking about in terms of the opportunities to integrate that data. So whether that's data personally about people, we talked about the fact that people very often say that they have to repeat the information to every professional. So if that's held in a space where they can hold it and they can manage it, then that can go a long way to not having to do that. But also, you know, using that space for local signposting or local information that can be held there, and also how does that integrate with their healthcare data and their access to their healthcare data. So we were very fortunate to have Francis in our group to be discussing that with us. We talked about acceptability. So generally people do want these apps. This is how we communicate. This is how we get information all the time. This is how we access information, but really important to consider what is helpful and not overloading that, and to make it out. One of the sort of comments that was made was about a patient citizen choice space. So we have to engage our partners and our patients in what is helpful and when we develop this. So obviously moving very fast, there's lots of different things being developed. So we talked about how the challenge is across that engagement across the Scottish Government, health and social care partnerships, third sector, patients and families. So we're integrating and doing something which is really useful and doing something which is together. We've not got a million apps all over the place, and you know, people have a one space for that. Interoperability, we're very fortunate to have Andy Wind, who works with Iona on the Spina and was around the Spina Bifida app, obviously talking about interoperability, which we mean by managing data, transferring data, filtering that data. So these things come with a whole load of data that we have to manage as well. What is useful for people, what is useful for us, and how do we manage that is a challenge on the way forward. So all very positive, but really loads needed in terms of collaboration and loads needed in terms of a kind of how do we do this and how does it function really well for people on the ground. That was us.
Wow. Thank you so much. That was a whirlwind, but really, really helpful. Richard, did you have anything else to add from your group's feedback, please?
Yeah, probably the three key points that came out of our group were, you know, a lot of the projects that we've done presentations on over the last couple of days have been about well-being, and that's often, those are not, there's possibly a lack of awareness from clinicians about onward referral to those. So there was a big theme around, and this came out yesterday as well, knowing what's out there. And trying to embed that within NHS services. And our colleague Susan Robertson from Edinburgh City HSCP mentioned the project that they're doing around single point of referral through the Ashley Ainsley and the challenges of that. She mentioned about it, said that they're mapping information sources at the moment, digital platforms. They've found 42 of them. So there's something maybe around strategic coordination of that nationally. So that's those are probably the main points. I don't know if anybody wants to add in from the group that I was in, because those are just that's just a handful of what we discussed.
Okay, thank you very much. Anissa, anything else from your group, please?
So, we were lucky to have Deborah from Spina Bifida, Hydrocephalus Scotland, and Jane from the Brain Injury Project in Lanarkshire. So there's quite a lot of chat about just about how some of the detail about how those projects were running, and in particular in talking about the app, about the as I think Maggie had mentioned around the data sharing arrangements around that, and that really how things are trying to be very holistic, present a very sort of holistic picture around the individual. We sort of commented how many people seem to be keen to take up digital care, and there was a kind of reminder and a bit of a plea, I guess, about Near Me, and a sort of reminder that the use of Near Me is available for third sector organisations if they're working in partnership with statutory partners to deliver services. And And there was discussion about the level of support that's needed by some individuals, some service users, to be kind of using like the apps and various kind of approaches, and the importance of kind of always looking about how we can simplify things around that. There's discussion about how things can be used very early in somebody's journey, around that kind of testing, diagnosis, period. And also sort of questions about how it might relate to the provision of integrated social care as well, because it doesn't seem to sort of come up so much in the discussion, I think, today. In terms of embedding and sustaining some of the work, obviously there was a sort of strong point around resources and around money going forward. But Jane was just speaking, it was sadly cut off in her prime as we moved, and was starting to talk about their project, about how their people that they support have key workers who are kind of looking to continue and to embed on this approach in their practice. That's where we're at.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. And thanks also to the group that had to endure me for another session. It sounds as if we had some very similar conversations as well. I guess on top of all the really, really valid and pertinent points, we also had a discussion around the importance of data and meaningful data, and how powerful that is in terms of taking a number of these pieces of work forward. Recognition also around the importance and how helpful the data sharing agreements have been, and similarly to your group, Anissa, how we extend that beyond to other organisations and things as well. And of course, scalability and funding are always the challenges as we move forward. So thank you to our facilitators for the session. Thank you to our presenters throughout the session this morning, and thanks to everybody who has joined the session and contributed. Today we've heard of some fantastic innovations that are clearly enhancing care and support for people living with neurological conditions. And it's also very reassuring to see how this links in with the wider strategic framework. Clearly, as we face ongoing challenges and long-term sustainability, we are very aware of the need for funding, and the fact that many of the projects are seeking ongoing funding, which of course there's no guarantee in relation to funding, and also the longevity of some of these projects as well. Today was just a taster, and I know it's been extremely challenging for all of the projects to sum up their work in only 5 minutes, and you have been incredible. So thank you so much for doing that, and made my job so incredibly easy. However, I hope that we have managed to facilitate some introductions and some further thoughts and actions. The majority of these projects obviously rely on staff costs, meaning that long-term sustainability will continue to be a challenge. Many are seeking direct funding from statutory organisations and other sources to ensure that longevity. Scottish Government will continue to support engagement between third sector and statutory partners to promote the benefits of these models of service delivery. In terms of next steps, there will be an evaluation form circulated to you all after today's event, and we do ask that you fill this in honestly and return it. The feedback is really important, as it will provide important information on how we run future sessions for other funded projects. There's also a Scottish Government neurological website covering this area of work, the link to which has been posted within the chat. And we will be able to share the presentations with you for access as well. So all that remains for me, this is a record with a minute to go. All that remains for me to do now is to say thank you to everyone for attending. It's fantastic that you've been part of this, and I do look forward to seeing how we can develop our work further so that we can fulfil our aim to make a real difference for people living with conditions in Scotland. So I will now officially draw this event to a close, and thank you all so much for your participation today. Thank you.
Thank you.